Hello, this is Max. Van Helsing is trying to save humanity from Dracula and his female vampires who want to create offspring to enslave the world. Don't forget to subscribe. Dr. Victor Frankenstein has successfully created life but faces an enraged mob of villagers at his doorstep. Count Dracula appears and reminds Victor that he provided the castle and laboratory for his experiments, demanding that Victor's creation now serve him.
I'll take him away.
As the angry mob invades the castle, Victor learns of Dracula's nefarious plans. Desperate, he calls for his assistant Igor's help, but Igor has switched allegiance to Dracula. In a final act of defiance, Victor attempts to kill Dracula but is reminded of the vampire's immortality. Dracula then drinks Victor's blood. Following this, Victor's creation intervenes, trapping Dracula and carrying Victor's body to a nearby windmill. As the mob approaches, the creation mourns for its creator before the windmill collapses, sending both Dracula and the creation into the fiery abyss. A year later, Van Helsing confronts Mr. Hyde at Notre Dame. Despite the preference of his superiors to save Hyde's human side, Van Helsing opts for a quick destroy. The encounter turns violent, with Hyde knocking Van Helsing back and disappearing briefly. Hyde eventually traps Van Helsing in the church's bell. To escape, Van Helsing cuts off his own arm and uses a grappling hook to break his fall. A fierce battle ensues, leading to Hyde's death and transformation back into Dr. Jekyll. The next day, Van Helsing meets Cardinal Jeanette and is scolded for damaging the rose window. They discuss how Van Helsing was found half dead with no memory and believed to be sent to do God's work. They head to the headquarters of the Knights of the Holy Order, tasked with combating hidden evil forces. Van Helsing is assigned the mission to kill Dracula in Transylvania. He learns of the Valerius family's centuries-old vow to vanquish Dracula to secure their place in heaven. Boris Valerius, the family's descendant, disappeared, leaving behind Vulcan and Anna. If the siblings die before Dracula, their family's souls will remain restless. An insignia matching Van Helsing's ring is a clue to his past. He goes to Transylvania with an assistant named Karl. Vulcan uses himself as bait for a werewolf. Anna rushes to save him, but the situation becomes dire when Vulcan's men cut the rope, releasing the werewolf. Vulcan sacrifices himself to save Anna. Van Helsing and Karl arrive in Transylvania, where they are met by the hostile Undertaker and Anna. Van Helsing defends them and battles Dracula's brides. They discover a mysterious well and are attacked by the brides, but sunlight briefly interrupts the confrontation. Van Helsing destroys Marischka with a holy water-infused arrow, prompting Verona and Illyria to flee. Despite his victory, the villagers criticize him for killing the vampires, and it commends him as the first vampire hunter in over a century. Dracula mourns Marischka's death and berates his brides. He tasks his new creation with finding her killer. His brides, heartbroken by their recent failures, are torn between fear and loyalty. With his brides in his arms, Dracula sends his Dwargy servants to Castle Frankenstein. Anna reveals Dracula's historical connection to Castle Valerius. She insists on facing Dracula alone, citing her lack of preparation for daytime vampire attacks. Van Helsing sedates her to ensure her safety. Anna wakes up, discovers beast footprints, and shoots a werewolf in the moonlight. Vulcan appears alive but transforms back into a werewolf, leaving Anna in tears. Van Helsing arrives, but Vulcan escapes by leaping out of a window. He gives chase but encounters the Undertaker digging graves instead. Suddenly, the transformed Vulcan attacks, forcing Van Helsing to dodge, resulting in the Undertaker's death. When Van Helsing prepares to shoot Vulcan, Anna intervenes, causing him to miss. An argument ensues, with Van Helsing claiming that Vulcan is no longer her brother.
He's not your brother anymore, Anna!
Surprised by his knowledge, Anna berates him for shooting at Vulcan and reveals her hope to find a cure for lycanthropy from Dracula. Van Helsing sympathizes with Anna's plight and agrees to help. They discover wolf fur on a path, indicating that Vulcan hasn't fully transformed, suggesting the possibility of a cure. Observing activity at Castle Frankenstein, They decide to investigate. Inside the castle, Velkin regains his human form but remains under Dracula's control. Dracula reveals a corpse being manipulated by Dwargess, and Velkin recognizes his father's necklace. Dracula places Velkin on a steel table, considering him a potentially more effective weapon than his father due to his lycanthropy. Anna and Van Helsing enter the castle and overhear Dwargess talking about Velkin. They also find numerous eggs, deducing that these are undead children Dracula is attempting to bring to life. As the Dwargess activate Victor's machine, Velkin is raised to a tower where lightning strikes him, infusing the eggs with electricity and reviving the offspring. Van Helsing shoots the creatures, drawing Dracula's attention. Meanwhile, the villagers awaken to the threat of thousands of vampire children led by their mothers. When Anna arrives at Velkin's side, he stops her from unstrapping him as he transforms once more. Elsewhere, Van Helsing stabs Dracula through the heart, but it has no effect. Dracula recognizes Van Helsing as Gabriel and realizes that he has no memory of his past. Unperturbed, Van Helsing brandishes a crucifix, which Dracula easily burns. In the village, Carl saves a woman from one of the vampire offspring, but suddenly, the creatures begin exploding, and Illyria and Verona return to the castle. Their cries distract Dracula, allowing Van Helsing to escape and reunite with Anna. Using a grappling hook, they attempt to flee, but Velkin, in his werewolf form, interferes, causing them to crash to the ground. On their way to the ruins of a windmill, Anna criticizes Van Helsing for using ineffective weapons against Dracula. She finally accepts that Velkin is no longer himself. Suddenly, the floor collapses, sending them into an underground cavern. In the morning, Carl discovers a hidden painting in the church depicting knights battling a vampire and a werewolf. Anna and Van Helsing encounter Frankenstein's monster in the cavern, who insists he has done nothing wrong and wishes to exist. Van Helsing weakens the monster with tranquilizer dots, but Anna considers killing him. Velkin arrives, and Anna fears he will inform Dracula of the monster's location. Van Helsing decides to transport the monster to the Order's headquarters. Verona and Illyria attack as they approach a broken bridge. The carriage falls, but it's loaded with explosives and silver stakes, which detonate upon impact, killing Verona. Van Helsing reunites with Anna, who is driving the real carriage with Carl and the monster. Velkin attacks, causing them to jump to safety. The friction from Velkin's claws ignites the carriage, and Van Helsing and Anna hang onto opposite sides. They jump clear just as Van Helsing shoots and kills Velkin. Later, Anna discovers her fatally wounded brother, who dies in her arms. When Van Helsing approaches, a grieving Anna initially blames him for her brother's death. However, she notices Van Helsing's own wound, indicating that he's been bitten. Suddenly, Illyria appears and abducts Anna, taking her to Budapest. When the men arrive in the city, Illyria informs them that Dracula wants to trade Anna for the monster during the upcoming masquerade ball. After Illyria departs, Carl notices Van Helsing's wound, and the monster realizes that he will transform into a werewolf.
Now you will become that which you have hunted so passionately.
Nevertheless, Van Helsing sedates the monster once more and conceals him in a cemetery. Carl reassures Van Helsing that Dracula won't be able to control him until he fully transforms, which will happen at midnight 2 nights from now. At the masquerade ball, Dracula compels Anna to dance with him, revealing his intention not to trade her. As they face a mirror, Anna sees a reflection while realizing that the other guests are also vampires. Dracula announces his desire for a new bride and prepares to turn Anna. However, Carl intervenes by igniting Dracula's cape with the help of a performer. Van Helsing swings from a trapeze to rescue Anna. Before they can escape, Igor arrives with the monster, taken from the cemetery. With the monster on his side, Dracula unleashes his vampiric guests on them. The trio seeks refuge in a room where they find Carl, and they escape through a window after Carl sets a bomb that devastates the vampires. They fall into the water and witness the monster being taken away. Despite Van Helsing's determination to save him, Carl reveals that the Order plans to kill the monster to prevent him from being used for evil. This angers Van Helsing, leading to a confrontation with Carl, who explains that he didn't inform the Order about Van Helsing's impending werewolf transformation. Van Helsing, overwhelmed by rage, momentarily chokes Carl, but eventually apologizes to his friend. The next day, they find Castle Frankenstein empty. Carl assures them that Dracula cannot revive his children until sundown, and that he will help them locate Dracula's lair. In Castle Valerius, Carl recounts the history of Dracula, revealing that he is Valerius the Elder's son, who was murdered by the left hand of God. Upon his death, Dracula made a pact with the devil to grant him immortality. Valerius the Elder, tormented by the evil his son became, made a vow to destroy him but could never bring himself to kill his own child. Instead, he banished Dracula to an icy fortress and left clues for his descendants to carry out the task. Recalling Boris's fixation on a map of the castle, Van Helsing discovers a missing piece and uses Jeanette's scroll as the final element. When they walk through the mirror-like portal, they arrive at Castle Dracula. Inside, they confront Igor, with Van Helsing pinning him to a wall with a thrown blade. Hearing the monster's cries, they find him being raised by Dracula, who is poised to activate his machine. Van Helsing opens the bars to reach the monster, but the monster reveals that Dracula has a cure for his werewolf curse and urges Van Helsing to save himself. Carl deduces that a werewolf can kill Dracula, and Anna argues that Dracula has used werewolves in the past. However, Carl believes that Dracula needs the cure to transform them back into humans if they ever defy him. Van Helsing instructs Igor to take Anna and Carl to the antidote while he confronts Dracula. Before parting ways, Anna and Van Helsing share a passionate kiss. As the monster is transported to the tower to revive Dracula's children, Van Helsing climbs to confront Dracula. On the opposite tower, Igor presents the antidote to Anna and Carl but locks them inside.
You tried to get Igor. Igor get you.
Alira appears, and Anna uses the acidic contents of the jar to burn Alira's face. Carl retrieves the antidote, while Anna melts the gate with the acid. As Carl escapes, Alira attacks Anna and throws her back. Outside, Carl runs towards the bridge, but Igor attacks him with an electric spear. At the top of the tower, Van Helsing frees the monster, but lightning strikes the creature, activating the machine. Dracula transforms into a monstrous form and attacks Van Helsing. Another lightning bolt strikes the monster, bringing Dracula's children to life. Struggling through electrocution, the monster leaps off the table and hangs from cables. He swings across the bridge, knocking Igor to his death. The monster pleads with Carl for help, and despite Carl's initial hesitation, he decides to assist. Meanwhile, Alira confronts Anna and prepares to drink her blood. The monster crashes into the scene, pushing Alira away and urging Anna to go to Van Helsing while he deals with Alira. Anna thanks him before leaving. In the laboratory, Dracula corners Van Helsing as he celebrates his children's resurrection. Van Helsing knows that the children will die upon Dracula's death and transforms into a werewolf to battle the vampire.
This cannot be.
Dracula initially gains the upper hand but is ultimately overcome. When the clouds cover the moon, Van Helsing reverts to his human form. He hides as Dracula recounts their shared history and offers to restore Van Helsing's memory, which Van Helsing declines.
The return of my ring.
As the clouds part again, allowing him to turn into a werewolf, Van Helsing bites Dracula's neck, destroying him and his children. Anna arrives and lunges at the werewolf with the antidote, but the beast catches her arm. To their astonishment, Anna manages to inject the antidote into Van Helsing, sacrificing herself in the process. The werewolf carries her body, howling in grief as he transforms back into a human. Finally, they cremate Anna's body on a funeral pyre, while the monster sets sail on a raft, seeking a place where he can live in peace. If you are interested in such films, please proceed to the next video on the screen, and also share your thoughts about this film in the comments. Give us a like and subscribe. Goodbye.